5,000 people are about to descend on the city of Glasgow for the Great Climate Change Conference, COP26. This is where global leaders are going to debate how to tackle global warming. And it runs for a whole 2 weeks, so brace yourself for a barrage of warnings about how the world will end if we don't all get rid of our gas boilers and bow down before Greta Thunberg. We'll all be told we've got to play our part by buying electric cars. Have you checked out quite how expensive those are? Eating less meat and taking less foreign holidays. Now, I'm actually in favour of a lot of this. We have got to stop destroying wildlife habitats for cattle ranching and filling the sea with plastic. But while Boris Johnson wants this country to set an example to the world by reaching so-called net zero on carbon emissions by 2050, he's busy letting British water companies pour billions, and I mean billions, of litres of raw and semi-treated sewage into our rivers and into the sea, often right by the beach. Now, this has actually been going on for years. People haven't really been that aware of it, and the full scale of the problem was exposed in a Commons debate last week, when a handful of brave MPs, generally those from constituencies affected, tried to get ministers to do something about it. And do you know what Boris Johnson did? He ordered his troops to vote against measures. Those measures that would have slapped a legal duty on water companies to stop polluting our waters in this way. So pretty inexplicable. Joining me now to talk about what happened in the Commons last week and where next for the campaign to tackle the outrageous behaviour of utility companies here in the UK is Craig McKinley. He's MP for South Thanet, and that is one of the areas affected. Hello, Craig. Thanks for joining us. You were one of the rebels last week, weren't you? Tell me about what the water companies have been doing in your constituency.
Well, there are a lot of very bad water companies, and I'm afraid Southern Water has shown itself up to be one of the very worst. It was slapped with a £90 million fine, one of the biggest in corporate history, in July, for, years' worth of not only dumping at sea, but trying to cover it up as well. So they were found out, and you can imagine the outrage in my constituency, a constituency that is very reliant on tourism. We've got 14 of some of Britain's best blue flag beaches. At the height of summer, they were all closed because of yet another accident, leakage problem that Southern Water did on our beaches. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had similar again. All beaches closed because of Southern Water. Now, when we had that amendment, it's all quite complicated in Parliament, as I'm sure you appreciate, Isabel, but the amendment that came from the Duke of Wellington that we were to consider, to me, was not an unreasonable extra requirements that we require of our water companies to actually stop this from happening. This has been happening for years. You could argue that the basic infrastructure of our sewage system, a lot of it Victorian, is just now simply not fit for purpose. We've had extra developments, extra planning. You could argue not enough Section 106 contributions by developers. And we've just added on to a system that's creaking into one that is now very much falling over. It's got to change because, frankly, I've had enough. I really have had enough of having sanitary towels, condoms and everything else on my beaches in Thanet. I've had enough.
I absolutely agree with you there. And let's talk for a minute about Southern Water. You mentioned that they'd had this £90 million fine. A lot of our viewers probably won't realise that that related to breaches that took place between 2010 and 2015. So the company, that investigation will have gone on for a very long time. The company was aware for many years that the authorities were onto them. But those breaches didn't stop in 2015, did they? The company continued, even once they knew that inspectors were onto them, to dump sewage, either raw or semi-treated, into our waters. Its track record is simply appalling, isn't it?
No, it is indeed. I certainly don't hold a candle for Southern Water, but I can appreciate if you've got the most unusual once in a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year deluge comes through, yes, perhaps no matter what you tried to do, that we'd have problems. But this isn't just once in a flood or once in a blue moon. This is a very, very regular occurrence. I mean, I'm not an engineer of water sewage systems, but a lot of the failures that we've seen by Southern Water have been simple mechanical failures of various pumping stations. That means there aren't secondary systems, there aren't additional power systems uninterruptible in position. So some of these errors that they've made, particularly of late, I feel are down to just cyclical maintenance issues. I mean, there are other issues. Of course, we've got a very strange sewage system whereby rain runoff mixes in with our sewage, proper sewage from our houses, and goes down the same tube. I mean, you wouldn't start a new sewage system like that, but that's what we've got. But they really need to invest in bigger tanks to actually hold up this effluent that's mixed when you have times of rain, and not particularly excessive when we have these problems. And that infrastructure needs to be built, now and very, very much in the near future as soon as they can, because, as I speak today, I think over the last week, there's been, again, a multitude of outfalls of raw sewage into our seas, not just in my area, but around the entire south coast. But the big problem is, of course, who's going to pay for all this?
You're absolutely right. I happened to check the Southern Waters website this morning. I looked at the Isle of Wight because that's a place that's very special to me. And there have been outflows actually in the last 24 hours. I mean, this is all the time. These overflow systems were supposed to be sort of emergency outflows, weren't they, for extreme weather? And actually, they're just the regular use of it. Help us understand why, ahead of COP26, when we are supposed to be setting an example to the world in terms of our standards on environmental care, that so many members of Parliament, your colleagues, refuse to join moves to stop water utility companies doing this?
Well, I think that's a bit of a simplistic appraisal of what happened. I mean, I don't know any colleague who wants to have raw sewage dumped on beaches. The argument given by the government was, there are measures in the Environment Bill, which is very robust, actually. It's a very robust bill. There's nobody better than me that wants to leave this planet in a better place than we found it. So I think of that was a little bit of a simplistic appraisal of where people are coming from. But the government should have appreciated the seriousness of particularly tourist areas and what this means to them. And I think they were caught a little bit unawares by the outrage across the country. And I would say it's probably my number one email inbox of this last week. That probably happened to all of colleagues across Parliament. Government has recognised that. And we heard from the Secretary of State, George Eustace, just last week, that when it does come back to the House on, I believe it's the 8th of November, there will be something very much stiffer in there, which I think is somewhere close to that amendment that I voted for, that many colleagues didn't. So I think we're in a better place. But, as ever, government doesn't seem to recognise the strength of feeling out there sometimes, and it'd be better in many cases to be ahead of the curve rather than behind it. But we do need to discuss cost here.
You make that point.
We do need to discuss cost.
You make the point about cost, and it's very easy for the utility companies to say, as Southern Water has done, and those who have supported them in a way have done, and said, look, it's phenomenally expensive to change the entire sewage system. We don't need to change the entire sewage system, do we? We simply need to build more storage facilities so that when there are these heavy rain, the tanks don't simply overflow. And secondly, repair existing pipework. I mean, a lot of the time, as you will know, pipes that are supposed to go quite far out into the sea actually leak their content onto beaches.
No, absolutely right. We were offered last week estimates by the government of why this was too expensive an amendment to support. And we had a figure put at us at 150 to 600 billion. Given that's quite a range of difference, made me think nobody's really thought about this very carefully, because you've got a range of 4 times here. You're absolutely right, Isabel. I'm not saying we need to rip up every sewer across the whole country. I'm sure there are some areas that manage with the system that they've got. What we need is the water companies to make sure their cyclical maintenance is up to standard, that they have secondary systems in case of failure, and to build tanks to actually cope with times of excessive rainfall. I can't see that's going to cost something of 150 to 600 billion, because at the end of the day, if we did want that type of complete rip out of our sewage system, you and I would have to pay for it in excessive water bills. But we have a very strange market in water. It is a controlled monopoly. I don't have any choice where I live but to pay a bill to Southern Water. If I want a better system, it will come out in our bill. It's always, I know, very easy to have a virtuous viewpoint on these things. Very easy to do that until you get the bill for it. So we need a way that is better. Now, you mentioned COP26. I would rather the delegates that are coming there are talking about these type of issues, talking about getting rid of single-use plastics, making sure rivers around the world are not blocked with this type of filth, that we are stopping proper noxious releases of chemicals into the environment. That's what we could achieve in a very, very short time. These ambitions for net zero by 2050, largely uncosted, we know very expensive. I think it's altogether a glorious waste of time. But I am on the critical side of all this.
Thank you. Well, Craig, one more question for you. Have you looked into the ownership of Southern Water? Do you know who is actually behind the company?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I've looked into across the country the ownership, and there is a lot of foreign ownership and investment money. Currently, Southern Water had a dilution of its share capital, and it's now owned by an investment company from Australia called Macquarie. They had investment in Thames Water years ago, which wasn't not a great experience for consumers. But, it's not uncommon for these to be foreign owned. I've looked into, you've got the government of Kuwait owns some, you've got BT Pension Fund owns 2% of Thames Water. That is what the market seems to be. It always seems strange that a country that is the centre of the capital markets of the world, with a massive amount of pension fund money, often looking for a good home, we don't seem to want to invest in our own homegrown utilities, but foreign investors do. I've always found that a little bizarre, but I'm not going to go up the route of saying we shouldn't have foreign investment in this country any more than I certainly do want British companies to invest abroad. So that is not a cycle of virtue that I think we need to go down, but we need very proper regulation and perhaps to look at some of the dividend flows out of some of these companies and say, thou shalt not have these dividends until you get your house in order. And I think that's somewhere the regulator could go to.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's not a wild debate to question whether there should be majority foreign ownership of critical national infrastructure. The French, the Americans, they don't allow that. I mean, I've looked at the structure of Southern Water. It's majority overseas owned. It's little surprise that the directors shrug a little when our beaches are so polluted if they live thousands and thousands of miles away. So I think that is a worthy debate to have. But as you said, the short-term objectives of just getting these companies to repair their pipes altogether very, very achievable. Thank you very much, Craig McKinley, MP.